The last thing I'd like to talk about in order to really understand Ruby is what they call blocks. So let's create a new file here, being user in Ruby, and we will call it blocks. And what we're going to do is see how blocks are used and then see how to write blocks. So first off, we can see some very simple example by doing iteration through an array. So I'm going to create an array with just 1, 2, 3 in it. Let's make it look a little bit nicer there. And I'm going to iterate through it using the each method. And the each method takes a block. And you've seen this already in some example videos. The curly braces are example of beginning the block. And that block receives a parameter. I'll just call it I because it's a nice iterating value that would seem to always use. And let's do something really simple. We'll just put S. We'll print that value out. So this is a real simple example here. So let's make it executable. And we're ready to go. So let's run that. And we get 1, 2, 3 printed out. So this squiggly begin end pair is a block. It's basically a function or method that can be passed into another method. And another way that you can see block notation, I'll do something a little bit different here, is I'm going to use a hash. I'm just going to do this so that it is larger in space. So notice I'm using the syntax so that key and other are symbols, and that is fine. And we will go ahead and do this. Now if I'm going to iterate through that hash, I am going to do that, but now I'm going to run out of space here. And so what I'm going to do is use do end. It's the same meaning as we had up here, except it's allows for multi-line. In fact, technically you can do this on multi-line as well. The convention with a lot of Rubyists is to do end if it's multi-line and squiggles if it's single line. So the other interesting thing is, since this is a hash, we get both our key and our value. So I'm going to put 2 parameters in the hash in the block. So you can see that these blocks are really like other methods in that you can pass them parameters. So here I'm going to do multiple lines. I'm going to do something like printing out the key, and I need to send it to a string since it started out as a symbol, and the value, which is already string, and we can go ahead and run that, and we see exactly what we want. Maybe to really enforce it being multi-line, I'll put something just in here just to really make sure that we wouldn't want to put this in a single line because there's multiple code lines in here. So I'm going to reverse both our keys and our values, and we now see gobbledygook, but that's what we want. So this is an example of using inline blocks. This is example multi-line blocks. They both mean the same thing. And you see this throughout the Ruby library ecosystem. You're constantly giving a method another method to iterate through, or you're giving another method to sum values in an array, or to transform them, or to collapse them, or to create them. And so it's a very powerful way to make a generic system of methods that can let you as a programmer tell the library how it were to work. So let's go ahead and make a really simple, kind of nonsensical example of using a block. So I'm going to create a new method, and I'm going to call it, I don't know, let's call it double before iterating. In other words, I'm going to take an array and I want to iterate through it, just like we saw up here with each. But before I iterate, I want to double it. So if I take that, I can sort of do that by doing something like array.each, and in there I can take my value and I can do I times 2. But now I've got a problem. Normally each takes a method and does whatever we want. We need, in our double before iterating, the method that we want the person to pass us to do. We need a way to express that. And the Ruby way to do that is we could use, it always has to be the last parameter. We use this ampersand, and I'm just going to call it a block. And this ampersand block says, I'm expecting someone to pass me code to run. And when should I run the code? Well, I should run it after I multiply by 2. And what should I do with it? Well, I should do whatever the block tells me to do. Well, how do I tell the block to do what I want? And that's where our keyword comes in. And that is yield. What yield does is it stops running the code we're running and starts running the block that we're given. And this value, I times 2, is passed in as a parameter to this block. And so this is a single parameter block. You could do a second or a third, however many parameters you would want, and each one of those would get passed to the block. So let's go ahead and, well, if we run it, we're not going to see anything different right now because we haven't tried to use this method. Let's go ahead and try to use this method. We can do it really simple here, double before iterating, and let's pass it that same array of 1, 2, and 3. And just like with each, we pass it there. It doesn't look like it's a parameter right here like it does here because Ruby interprets this block that's at the end of this method as being thrown into this block right here. We know, because of how we've written double before iterating, that our block needs one parameter. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to use a different parameter here, x, just so we don't get confused as what I is versus what x is. And I'm just going to print out what that parameter is right there. So now, if we run this, we can see we got 2, 4, and 6, which is 1, 2, and 3 doubled. And we could go ahead and change these numbers to say 1, 5, and I don't know, 13. And if we run it, we see 1, 5, and 13 doubled. So you can see that what was printed out here were the doubled values. So what this block got were the values doubled here. So we passed into double before iterating 1, 5, and 13 as the array, and this iterated through each array element. We iterated through 1, 5, and 13, and before we ran this block right here, we doubled them, and then we called yield on that with that doubled value. And that doubled value got passed back into this. And so 1 got doubled to 2. 2 got passed in here. It printed out 2. Then it returned back to the last point that yield was called, and yield finished. And we iterated through the next one. We got 5. We doubled that to 10. And then we called yield, so we went back into this block, and we get 10 for x, and we print out 10. We're done. We return back to where yield called us, and we're done with that iteration, and we now go through 13 and so forth. So this is a very powerful way to write methods that can be generic. A lot of times it's through some sort of iterating or transforming values that they get used. In fact, if we take this lesson plus our classes are open lesson, we probably would want to do something more like this, where we'd want to directly manipulate array and, I don't know, call it something like to match each, we'll call it each double. This probably isn't a great name, but it shows now. And what we're going to do is we're going to iterate through ourselves, so we can just call each on ourselves, and you can see that this looks a lot like up here, except we don't have to call on the explicit array because we know what array we're talking about. We're in our array class. So now we've modified array, and we can do this directly. Let's do it on 4, 5, and 6, each double, and go ahead and print out. I'll just do y just to make sure it's clear that it's completely separate from anything else we've seen before. And we can see 4 doubled, 5 doubled, and 6 doubled. And so we have now created a new iterator for our array class that doubles our values before we iterate through them. Like I said, it's kind of a nonsensical value, but it is a way for us to make these more generic iterations. You probably, with Rails, will be doing less of this, creating your own iterators that you need to do explicitly, because Rails has many of them already built in for you. But you're very often going to be doing things like this, where you're creating a block and using an already built-in method for an object that expects a block. And so you can do it like this with the squiggly braces, or with this with the multi-line comments. Either way works, and it allows you to really take advantage of these methods that Rails has created for you to iterate over common objects that you are going to be able to use. And so you need to know what these blocks are and how to use these blocks in order to effectively take advantage of the Ruby and the Rails ecosystems.